Another day at the office, missing my old routine, back when my mind wasn't consumed by a relentless loan shark threatening me at every turn. Back when my biggest worry was keeping David's schedule organized. David, my boss. The man who, ironically, has started to take up space in my thoughts in a way I never expected. I always saw him as a friend. Someone respectable, but distant, unattainable. And now, he means something far more complicated. Maybe this sudden attraction stemmed from my vulnerability, from the overwhelming feeling that my life was spiraling out of control. My name is Emily, in case anyone cares to know who this woman is. This woman who has become a prisoner of an impossible debt. Someone who hasn't slept properly in months, lying awake at night staring at the dark ceiling, desperately trying to figure out how to escape this burden. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch. My mother was sick, and I would do anything to see her healthy again. I did what had to be done. Every penny I had, years of savings, went into paying for her treatment. And when the money ran out, but the expenses didn't, I turned to the last option available, the loan shark. At first, he seemed kind. Maybe they always do. I don't even remember exactly when his kindness turned into threats, when his calm tone shifted to cold whispers filled with promises of destruction. At first, it was just calls, persistent, but polite, asking about the overdue payments. Then came the veiled threats, followed by more direct ones. He knew where I lived. He knew where my mother lived. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes to focus on the computer screen. The words blurred, their meaning slipping away. I used to be efficient, the best secretary David ever had. Organized, attentive, always one step ahead. Now, I was drowning in my own thoughts, trying to calculate impossible deadlines and ridiculous amounts of money I could never pay back. Maybe that vulnerability was what made me start looking at him differently. David. I glanced at him quickly. He was focused, his brow slightly furrowed as he analyzed an important document. The glow from his monitor highlighted his sharp, decisive features. What changed? When did this man become the anchor I secretly longed for? Was it the way he always smiled, even on the most chaotic days? Or the way he said my name, with an inflection that felt almost intimate? Or maybe, deep down, I saw him as a symbol of security, something I had completely lost. Emily? His voice pulled me from my thoughts, and my shoulders tensed. My heart pounded. He noticed my distraction again. Can you check the Morning Corp contract report? There seems to be a discrepancy in the numbers. Of course, sir. David, I'll check it now. I hated how my voice wavered. I hated how I felt nervous around him now. He watched me for a moment, his eyes searching for something beyond my words. Did he notice the dark circles under my eyes? The subtle tremor in my hands? I hoped not. I tried to smile but looked away before he had time to question me. I buried myself in the numbers, trying to push back the dark thoughts. But they always came back. They always came back. You have until the end of the week, Emily, or you'll learn what it means to lose everything. I could still hear the grin in his voice, the sadistic satisfaction of knowing he had complete control over my life. A stubborn tear threatened to escape, but I held it back with all my strength. I couldn't break down here, not in front of David. He didn't deserve to carry the weight of my misery. He was my boss, not my savior. And even if I wanted to tell him everything, how could I explain that I was falling for him precisely because he seemed strong enough to fight my monsters? Are you okay, Emily? His voice was filled with genuine concern. I turned too quickly, almost knocking over my glass of water. Yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired. You've seemed exhausted lately. If you need some time off, I can lighten your workload for a while. The kindness in his voice was a sharp blade, cutting through my fragile defenses. It's not necessary. I can handle it. Just Bad nights. It'll pass. He nodded, but his face said he didn't believe me. He didn't press the issue, which relieved me. If he knew how close I was to losing everything. What would he say? Would he look at me with pity? With contempt? And how could I ever face him after that? The shame suffocated me just imagining it. I had to fix this on my own. I had to. But how? The computer screen blurred as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. Not now. Not here. And definitely not in front of him. I just needed to get through one more day. Maybe tomorrow I'd find a way out. Maybe tomorrow I'd figure out how to escape this nightmare. Or maybe tomorrow I'd finally break. But today I could still pretend. David called me into his office. Just hearing my name from his lips made my heart race. I glanced at my trembling hands, took a deep breath, and forced myself to stay composed. The fear that I had made a mistake in a report, that I had let my weaknesses show too much, consumed me. Had he noticed? Was he about to fire me? I couldn't lose this job. It was the only thing keeping me afloat, the only source of income standing between me and complete ruin. I approached the slightly open door and knocked lightly before stepping inside. "You wanted to see me?" My voice was quieter than I intended. "Yes. Close the door, please." I obeyed, and the sound of the door clicking shut echoed in the room, trapping me in a space where there was no escape. I sat in the chair across from him, trying not to crumble under his intense gaze. He looked worried, different from his usual charismatic self. "Emily, what's going on with you?" My throat dried up instantly. My face burned with shame. He noticed. He really noticed. "I don't know what you're talking about." My defensive tone sounded fake even to my own ears. "This isn't like you. You've always been focused, detail-oriented. But lately, you seem distracted, exhausted. You're always nervous." He paused, studying my face. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm worried." My stomach twisted. His concern was genuine, and I didn't know what to do with that. No one worried about me. Everyone thought I was strong enough to handle anything. I had always believed that too, until my life spiraled completely out of control. "I'm just a little tired." The lie barely left my lips before I regretted it. Exhaustion was real, but it was the least of my problems. "It's more than that." His firm tone made my heart pound. David never pressured anyone. He had always been understanding with the entire team. But now his posture was that of a man who wouldn't accept evasions. "Look, I know I have no right to interfere in your personal life, but you can trust me. If you need help, anything, just tell me. Trust." The word echoed in my mind like an empty promise. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to pour all my fears and anguish onto his shoulders, confess that every threatening message made me tremble with terror, that I had nightmares of my mother suffering because of me. But how could I trust him without exposing my shame? My voice broke. I looked down at my hands, clenched together in a desperate attempt to stop shaking. My silence made him sigh. "I don't want to force you to talk, Emily." His voice softened, and I almost cried. How could he be so understanding? "I just want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone." Those words shattered something inside me. A tight knot in my chest loosened, and before I could stop myself, I felt the first tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, embarrassed, but that only made more fall. I don't know what to do." My voice came out broken. It was all I could say before completely falling apart. David stood up from his chair and walked around the desk, kneeling in front of me. When he took my hands in his, I didn't have the strength to pull away. His touch was comforting, warm. He was there, beside me. He wasn't judging, wasn't demanding anything. He was just waiting. The words began to spill out, disorganized between sobs. I told him everything, every miserable detail. How my savings had disappeared with my mother's treatment, the desperation of watching her so weak, the reckless choice to turn to a loan shark. At the time, it seemed like a quick solution, just a temporary loan. I was so focused on saving her that I hadn't thought about the consequences. Then came the debts, the absurd interest rates, the threats, the cruel messages, the suffocating feeling of being trapped in a tightening noose. David listened in silence, his hands still holding mine, grounding me while I broke down. When I finished, my eyes were swollen, my body trembling from exhaustion. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice was low, full of pain, as if he were suffering along with me. "Shame," I whispered. I got myself into this. I made bad choices. And you're so perfect. I didn't want you to know how weak I am." He shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "Emily, you're not weak. You did what you had to do to save your mother. That's not weakness. That's courage." His eyes darkened, his expression turning tense. "And this man? This bastard is threatening you?" I nodded, a cold shiver running down my spine at the mere thought of the loan shark's voice. David took a deep breath, his jaw tightening with restrained anger. "I'll take care of it." The words hung in the air, heavy with a determination I had never heard before. My heart stuttered, half in relief, half in fear. "David, no. You can't get involved in this. He's dangerous." I wanted to protect him. He had no idea what he was getting into. "I'll take care of it," he repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. Then, he stood up and walked back to his desk, his expression still dark with fury. "You're safe now, Emily. This won't haunt you anymore." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cling to those words as if they were divine promises. But something about the way he said it, something in that cold tone made me uneasy. "What are you going to do?" My voice shook. David looked up, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry about it. Just trust me." The tears had dried, but my heart was beating erratically. Trust. There it was again, that word. I needed to trust him. He was the only one who could save me from this nightmare. But why did I have the feeling that trusting him meant giving up something much bigger? Why did I feel that, by trusting him, I was stepping into the unknown, with no idea what was waiting for me on the other side? And why, despite all the fear, did I so desperately want to believe in him? I didn't have the answers. But in that moment, David's promise was enough to make me breathe again. The following days were strangely silent, too silent. The loan shark had simply disappeared. No more threatening calls, no more messages filled with sinister promises. Nothing. It was as if he had never existed. I should have felt relieved. I should have been celebrating the sudden peace. But all I felt was a growing unease, an unbearable sense that something was terribly wrong. My mind refused to accept this miracle without an explanation. I knew David was behind it. From the moment he looked at me with that restrained fury and promised to take care of everything, an unsettling feeling had taken root in me. What had he done? At the office, David acted as if nothing had changed. He was still attentive, focused, his confidence unshaken. But there was something different. A subtle tension in his shoulders, a restrained edge in his voice. And when our eyes met, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. I needed to know. I needed to understand what he had done to make that man disappear. Every possible scenario that formed in my mind was darker than the last. Had David done something illegal? Had he hurt someone? Flashbacks of his cryptic words haunted me. You don't need to know. Just trust me. The doubt began to eat away at me. It was late in the afternoon, when the office was almost empty, that I decided to confront him. David was on the phone, his office door slightly ajar. I intended to knock and enter, but his words stopped me mid-step. I don't want this to get to her, understand? I don't care what it costs, just keep it away from her. My heart pounded. He was talking about me. I knew it. Yes, I'll handle the rest. She can't find out what we did. The air left my lungs. What had he done? And who was on the other end of that call? I backed away from the door before he could see me, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. My legs trembled, and nausea rose in my throat. That tone of voice. Those cold words. This wasn't the David I knew. It wasn't the kind, protective man I had fallen for. My mind raced. How could I have been so naive? Did I really believe he had solved everything so easily? The loan shark wasn't the kind of man who just vanished. Not without a reason. Not without consequences. What if David had paid my debt in a way that couldn't be traced? What if he had used illegal means? My stomach turned. What if he had done something much worse? I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my thoughts spiraling. I tried to act normal, answering emails and organizing documents, but none of it registered. My mind was stuck on that phone call. When everyone had left, I found myself alone, staring at David's closed office door. I needed to know the truth. No matter how painful it was, I had to confront him and demand real answers. I took a deep breath and walked forward. I knocked twice before stepping inside. He was sitting at his desk, focused on a report, but he looked up the moment he saw me. His face softened with a small smile. Emily, I thought you had already left. I closed the door behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet room. I stood there, facing him, trying to find any cracks in his perfect mask. But he sat there, calm, composed, looking at me as if nothing had happened. We need to talk. My voice was steadier than I expected. The smile faded, replaced by a cautious expression. All right, sit down. I'd rather stand. I crossed my arms, trying to shield myself from the whirlwind of emotions threatening to consume me. I want the truth, David. No more vague answers. The truth about what? He tilted his head slightly, his gaze darkening. What did you do to the loan shark? I shot the question without hesitation. How did he just disappear? What exactly did you do? His jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his mask. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning my face as if measuring how much he should say. I told you, Emily. I took care of the problem. How? My voice trembled. Did you pay him off? Did you threaten him, or... I swallowed hard, the darkest possibility slipping out in a whisper. Did you... hurt him? David didn't respond immediately. His eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. You're alive. He spoke slowly, his voice eerily calm. Your mother is safe, and you don't have to worry about that bastard anymore. That's all that matters. My stomach twisted. That coldness, that absolute control. He was hiding something terrible. That's all that matters to you? I stepped closer, my body trembling. It doesn't matter what you did to make this happen. It doesn't matter if you crossed a line. I did what needed to be done. His eyes turned to steel. To protect you. You couldn't have just paid him off? Negotiated? Why did you do this in secret? Why didn't you tell me anything? David looked away for a brief second. as if guilt had finally caught up with him. But then, his expression hardened again, resolute. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to carry that burden. So it's true. My body went numb, the air around me turning heavy. You did something wrong. Something irreversible. He closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders falling slightly as if exhausted. When he looked at me again, his eyes were devoid of emotion. The problem is solved, Emily. That's all you need to know. You did something terrible, didn't you? My voice wavered. You became a criminal because of me. I did what was necessary. He stood up and walked toward me. Instinctively, I stepped back, fear tightening around my ribs. You're safe now. That's all that matters. No, it's not, I shouted, feeling tears sting my eyes. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know if I can trust you. For a brief second, pain flashed across David's face before he hid it away. You don't need to trust me. His voice was flat. You just need to forget this. I took another step back, shocked by his coldness. Then I turned and walked out before he could see the tears spilling down my cheeks. The man I loved had become a stranger, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. The doubt consumed me. It was like a slow poison, corroding everything inside me. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face. That cold, determined expression when he told me to forget. As if I could. As if it were easy to erase from my memory that dark gaze, that tense posture, that silence that spoke far more than he would ever admit in words. What did you do, David? I repeated that question like a mantra as I tried to go about my work duties. Every time he walked past me in the office, my heart pounded. I watched him discreetly, analyzing every gesture, every word. He was different. A little more tense, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. Or maybe it was just my paranoid mind, imagining things. But I wasn't imagining the phone call. I wasn't imagining the threatening tone in his voice when he said I was safe and that the problem had been resolved. How could he say that? How could he act as if everything was normal when I could barely breathe under the weight of these doubts? Turn him in. That thought invaded my mind like a treacherous whisper. If David had done something illegal, if he had hurt the loan shark, or worse, I should report him. It was the right thing to do. It didn't matter that he had done it for me. It didn't matter that I was now free from the threats because of him. If he had crossed the line of the law, he needed to answer for it. But how could I turn him in? I was in love with David. Not just a fleeting crush or shallow admiration. It was deep, overwhelming, as if a part of me had been ripped out and placed in him. Every time I saw him, I wanted to embrace him, feel the warmth of his arms, hear his soft voice telling me that everything would be okay. And if I turned him in, if he were arrested, I would lose him forever. I had to find the loan shark. I went to every bar, every restaurant, talked to his acquaintances. No one knew anything. He had simply vanished off the face of the earth. I spiraled into complete panic. I was trapped in a cycle of fear, guilt, and love. I spent the entire night awake. My thoughts spun endlessly, like a storm that refused to settle. David's words still echoed in my mind. His cold stare, the merciless tone of someone who had done what was necessary, no matter the consequences. I was in love with him. Deeply. But how could I keep loving a man who had crossed the line of morality? Every possibility tormented me. What if he had paid someone to hurt the loan shark? What if he had done something even worse? The doubt was unbearable. I couldn't breathe properly. Everything felt like it was collapsing around me. By morning, with red eyes and a pounding headache, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. Not the half-answers David had given me. Not the silences full of secrets. I needed the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. I was about to leave my house to go to the police, to report David and have an investigation opened against him. But suddenly, the phone rang. The number was unknown, but I answered without thinking. Hello? Emily? The rough voice made me freeze. I knew that voice. A shiver of pure terror ran through my body. We need to talk. The loan shark. My heart pounded. How did he have my number? How was he still alive? How? My voice faltered. How are you? We need to talk. Now, don't hang up. My mind spun. He was alive. Not just that. He seemed different. The threatening tone was gone. It had been replaced by something urgent. Almost desperate. Why would I talk to you? My voice came out bitter. You ruined my life. You don't understand. I'm not the villain in this story. He paused, his tone growing darker. I need to tell you what David did. My blood ran cold. So it was true. David had done something terrible. Something so horrifying that even the loan shark himself was shaken. My hands trembled, but I knew I had no choice. I had to listen. I met him in a secluded park, on a bench hidden among the trees. When I arrived, I barely recognized the man sitting there. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his clothes dirty and wrinkled. He looked like a ghost of the cruel man who had terrorized me for months. You're alive, I whispered, still in shock. Barely, he let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea how close I came to dying. I slowly sat down, unable to look away. What happened? He ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away painful memories. Your boss. David. He came out of nowhere. He confronted me. I thought he was just another idiot trying to play hero, but he surprised me. What did he do? My heart pounded, my voice barely a whisper. He found out everything. His voice cracked. Not just about you, but about the people I owed money to. People much worse than me, Emily. People who don't think twice before killing. A shiver ran through me. David paid off my debts. His voice wavered, pure disbelief in his eyes. He paid everything. He saved my life. I blinked, struggling to process his words. He paid your debts? Not just that. He exhaled, shaking his head. He helped me escape. He gave me money to disappear, to start a new life somewhere far from here. He stared at me, his voice dropping lower. He did all of it. For you. The confession hit me like a punch. David hadn't threatened the loan shark. He hadn't done anything illegal. He had simply paid. He had saved not only my life, but also his. Selflessly. In a way that was unimaginable. Why are you telling me this? My voice came out choked. Because he asked me never to tell you. The loan shark looked directly into my eyes. He said he didn't want you to feel indebted to him. That he did all of this because he loves you. The world spun. The trees around us, the distant sounds of the city. Everything faded into the background as those words echoed in my mind. He loved me. He had always loved me. And he had done all of this for me, without expecting anything in return. I shot to my feet, unable to find the right words. The loan shark remained seated, his shoulders slumped like a defeated man. But I couldn't feel pity for him. All I could think about was David. I ran. I didn't remember how I got to his house, but at some point, I found myself standing at his door. Breathless, my hands trembling as I pounded against it. The door opened, revealing a startled David, his face tired. Emily? Why didn't you tell me? The tears finally spilled over, my voice thick with emotion. Why did you let me believe you were a monster? His eyes softened, a sigh escaping as he leaned against the doorframe. You wouldn't have understood. Then make me understand. I stepped forward, grabbing the front of his shirt, my fingers clutching the fabric tightly. You saved my life. You saved his life, too. And you said nothing. Why? David looked at me with tenderness, his hands covering mine. Because I didn't want you to carry this guilt. I didn't want you to feel like you had to love me out of gratitude. I did what I did because... He paused, his eyes filled with raw sincerity. Because I love you, Emily. I always have. My knees weakened. I clung to him, feeling the warmth of his body as his words echoed inside me. He loved me. He had done all of this out of love. I thought I had lost you. My voice trembled. I thought that you had become someone cruel, someone heartless. I would do anything to protect you. Anything. He cupped my face gently, his touch tender. But I would never do something that would make you lose faith in me. I was sobbing now, relief and love crashing into each other. Before I could think, my lips found his in a desperate, intense kiss, filled with all the fear and passion that had been bottled up inside me. David pulled me into his arms, holding me tight, returning the kiss with the same fire, the same hunger. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, whispering, I will never let anything hurt you again. And I knew he meant it. There, in David's arms, I finally felt safe. For the first time in a long time, there were no more doubts. No more fears, only love, and it was all I needed.
What did you think of the story? Leave a comment below. Let us know which city you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more stories.